The morning Garrett Sinclair recognized the woman scrubbing the airport floor, he almost walked past her. He would have, too. That was the kind of man he had become, the kind who moved through crowded spaces with his phone in one hand and his boarding pass in the other, eyes fixed somewhere just above the heads of everyone around him. Toronto Pearson at 6:15 in the morning was its own particular species of chaos. Rolling suitcases, crying toddlers, the antiseptic smell of floor cleaner cutting through stale coffee. Garrett moved through all of it the way he moved through most things, efficiently, and without looking down. But something made him look down. She was on her knees near the base of the departure board, working a mop in slow circles around a puddle someone had left without a second thought. Her dark hair was pulled back under a gray cap. Her shoulders were hunched in the way of someone who had been at this for hours, and curled against the wall 2 feet away from her, wrapped in a coat that was clearly too thin for January, was a little girl, maybe 5 years old, asleep on a folded blanket, with her cheek pressed against a backpack. Garrett stopped. He stared at the sleeping child first. Then he looked at the woman again, really looked, and felt something drop in his chest like a stone. Vivienne. Not Vivienne the way he remembered her. Not the girl who had sat 2 rows ahead of him at Ridgeline Secondary in Ottawa. The one who read novels during lunch and argued with the economics teacher until he went red in the face. Not the girl who had turned down every invitation to every party and somehow still managed to be the most interesting person in any room she entered. This Vivienne was thinner. Her jaw was set in a way that suggested she had been clenching it for a very long time. But her hands, the way she moved those hands, careful and methodical even over an airport floor, were exactly the same. He said her name before he'd decided to. Vivienne. The woman stilled. For a long moment she didn't turn around. Then she sat back on her heels and looked up at him, and the expression on her face was not what he expected. It wasn't surprise. It was something closer to resignation, like a person who has just seen a storm rolling in from a direction they'd hoped it wouldn't come from. "Garrett," she said. He couldn't find words. He had built a company from a spare bedroom and a maxed-out credit card. He had sat across from people who made him nervous for exactly 11 minutes of his life, and he'd trained himself out of that habit before he was 32. He was not a man who lost his words. But standing in the middle of departures with his briefcase in one hand, and his whole understanding of a person colliding with the reality of her on her knees in front of him, he lost them completely. "You should get to your gate," Vivienne said, and turned back to the floor. He didn't go to his gate. His assistant, Cora, called twice before he switched his phone to silent. His flight to Calgary, a meeting worth roughly $4 million to his company, Sinclair Meridian, departed without him. He stood 10 feet away and watched Vivienne Okafor finish her shift, watched her fold the blanket around her sleeping daughter with the kind of careful, practiced love that you can't fake, watched her lift the little girl into her arms without waking her. Then he stepped forward again. "Let me buy you breakfast," he said. She looked at him over her daughter's head. The little girl had woken up by then. Dark eyes, serious face, clutching the strap of her mother's uniform with both fists. "We don't need anything from you," Vivienne said. "I know," Garrett said. "I'm asking anyway." She told him no 3 times. The 3rd time, her daughter, her name was Adeze, and she went by Ada, looked up at Vivienne and said, very quietly, "Mama, I'm hungry," and that was the end of it. They sat in a Tim Hortons near the domestic terminal. Ada ordered a chocolate Timbibs and ate it with the focused intensity of a child who has learned not to waste food. Vivienne ordered only coffee, and when Garrett ordered her a breakfast sandwich without asking, she didn't argue. She just looked at the table. He asked what had happened. She told him it didn't matter. He said it clearly did. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite exhaustion, somewhere in the complicated space between the two. "You really want to do this," she said. "Right now. Here, unless you'd rather somewhere else." The sound she made was not quite a laugh. "My shift ended 40 minutes ago. I have to pick up a second shift at 4. So unless you plan on this taking the rest of the day, yes, here is fine." He learned it in pieces, between sips of bad coffee and a table that wobbled every time Ada leaned on it. After high school, Vivienne had gone to Carleton on a scholarship. Political science, because of course she had. She had been 2 semesters from graduating when she met Brendan Lowe at a mutual friend's party. Smart, charming, Brendan, who worked in finance and had the kind of easy confidence that can look, from certain angles, remarkably like integrity. She had believed him when he said he loved her. She had believed him when she told him she was pregnant, and he said they would figure it out together. She had not believed her own instincts 3 months later when those instincts told her that something was wrong, that the phone calls he took in the other room were lasting too long, that he was coming home less, that his eyes slid past hers during dinner in the specific way of someone practicing a story. He left when Ada was 6 weeks old. Not a phone call, not a note. His things were gone from the apartment before Vivienne woke up on a Tuesday morning, and the only evidence he had ever been there was a half-empty bottle of his cologne on the bathroom shelf and a newborn who had his exact forehead. "I didn't have anything to fall back on," she said. Her voice was level. She had the tone of a person who has told this story enough times, to herself, mostly, that the sharp edges have worn down to something she can hold without bleeding. "My mum passed when I was in second year. My dad was never in the picture. I had Ada, and I had about $800, and I had no degree and no work history to speak of. Why didn't you go back to school? Because babies don't pause while you finish your thesis, Garrett." He was quiet. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said. She glanced at Ada, who had moved on from the Timbeebs to drawing something complicated on a paper napkin with a pen she'd produced from her coat pocket. "I'm telling you because you asked, and because I'd rather you know the actual story than whatever version you're constructing in your head." He watched Ada draw for a moment. Whatever she was making, she was deeply committed to it. "She seems sharp," he said. Vivienne's face changed. The set of it softened in a way that made her look, for just a second, exactly like the girl he'd known. "She's the smartest person I've ever met," she said, "and I've met a lot of people." He believed her. He didn't tell Vivienne he'd missed his flight. He found out that evening, when Cora sent him a message that contained the words, "Please tell me you have a good reason for this," and then, before he could answer, "Actually don't, I'll just reschedule," that the Calgary meeting had been pushed to Thursday. He told her Thursday was fine. He didn't know what to do with what he'd seen. That bothered him in a specific way. Garrett Sinclair generally knew what to do with things. He had built his career on the ability to assess a situation quickly, strip it to its functional components, and act. It was not a skill he had been born with. It was a skill he had built in the years after his own father's business collapsed, and Garrett had watched everything his family owned get quietly disassembled and sold, and had decided, at 17, that he would never be in that position. That he would be the kind of person things didn't happen to. He'd achieved that. And somewhere in achieving it, he had also become the kind of person who walked through airports without looking down. He looked up Vivienne that night. Not in a searching, elaborate way. She wasn't difficult to find. She had a minimal online presence, a LinkedIn profile from her Carleton days with no activity after 2019, and a sparse Facebook account that hadn't been updated in 2 years. The most recent thing on it was a photo of Ada at what appeared to be a birthday party, wearing a paper crown and grinning the specific grin of a child who has just been given cake. Someone had commented, "She looks just like you," and Vivienne had left it unanswered. He went back to the airport the next morning. She was on shift again. This time, when she saw him, she stopped walking and stared at him with an expression that suggested she was actively reconsidering a number of assumptions. "I'm not a stalker," he said. "I didn't say you were. You were thinking it." "I was thinking," she said slowly, "that you have a company to run and surely better things to do with your time." She looked at him for a long moment. "Where's Ada?" "At school. She starts at 8:15. He paused. "She told me that yesterday. She was very specific about it." Something passed across Vivienne's face. "She's very specific about most things. Can we talk? On your break, Garrett?" "I'm not trying to fix anything," he said. Which was a lie, and he suspected she knew it, but it was the right lie for the moment. "I just want to talk." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded, just barely, and turned back toward the terminal. He waited. Her break was 20 minutes. They sat on a bench near the arrival's door. Outside, January was doing what January in Toronto does, which is to say it was gray and relentless and showed no signs of stopping. "Ada has a heart condition," Vivienne said. She said it the way she'd said everything else. Directly, with no preparation, like pulling a bandage off. She was watching the automatic doors slide open and closed while she talked. "It's called an atrioventricular septal defect. She was diagnosed at 3 months. For a while they thought it might resolve on its own. But, she stopped, pressed her lips together. Started needs surgery. Has needed it for about a year. It's not immediately critical, but it's not something we can wait on forever. The waiting list at sick kids is long, and even with OHIP covering the procedure itself, the time off work, the follow-up care, the medications. I understand, Garrett said quietly. Do you? It wasn't a question. No, he said. Not really. But I'm trying to. She looked at him then, and something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, and he understood that. Understood it in the particular way of a person who has had to learn to be careful with people. But something that might have been the beginning of the willingness to consider trust as a possibility. I don't want your money, she said. I didn't offer you money. You were about to. He had been. What if I offered something else? She waited. I have a foundation, he said. Sinclair Meridian Community Trust. We fund access to healthcare navigation services, people who help families understand and move through the system, advocates who know which doors to push on and how to push on them. He paused. It's not a check. It's not charity. It's a resource. Yes. She was quiet for a long time. Out past the glass doors, a taxi pulled up and a man got out and immediately looked at his phone, walking toward the terminal without looking up. Why are you doing this? Vivienne asked. It was the question he'd been asking himself for 2 days. He had a number of answers available, professional ones, logical ones, ones about social responsibility and corporate community investment. He set all of them aside. Because I walked past you yesterday, he said, and I almost kept walking, and I've been thinking about that since. Let's do something fun. If you've made it this far, type Maple Leaf in the comments. Only the real ones will understand. She didn't say yes that day. She said she would think about it, and he took her at her word, because it was clear that was the kind of woman she was. She meant what she said, and she didn't say things she didn't mean, and if you pushed before she was ready, you'd get nothing. He gave her his card. She looked at it for a long moment before putting it in her jacket pocket, and she didn't say thank you, and he found that he preferred it that way. 3 days passed. He went to Calgary. The meeting went well, or at least well enough. He sat across from the table and said the right things and shook the right hands, and the whole time a part of his mind was doing something it had not done in years, which was drift. He caught himself thinking about Ada's paper crown photograph, about the specific way Vivienne's voice changed when she talked about her daughter. Not softer, exactly, but more true somehow, like the rest of the conversation had been translated, and that part was the original. On the 4th day, she called. The foundation, she said. Is the offer still open? Yes, I don't want to owe you anything. You won't. A silence. Then, Ada has an appointment on the 14th. I've been trying to get a caseworker assigned for 3 months. If your foundation can actually help with that. They can, he said. I'll make the call today. She was quiet for a moment longer. Okay, she said. Okay. That was February. He told himself it was professional follow-up when he called the following week to check on the appointment. He told himself it was reasonable concern when he called the week after that. By the 4th week, he had stopped telling himself things about it, and simply called, and Vivienne answered, and they talked for 40 minutes about Ada's progress, and then, without either of them quite planning it, about other things. About the Carleton Political Science Department, and whether it had improved since she was there, about a documentary he'd watched that she had very specific opinions on, about Ottawa in winter versus Toronto in winter, which she maintained was not actually a debate because Ottawa won by default on the grounds of at least being honest about what it was. You make winter sound like a character flaw, Garrett said. In Toronto's case it is, she said. At least Ottawa commits. Toronto can't decide if it wants to be a real city or a slightly larger version of somewhere warmer. He laughed. He didn't laugh often, and when he did it tended to catch people off guard. You haven't changed, he said. I've changed enormously, she said. But she didn't sound offended. She sounded like a person who knows exactly who they are, which is entirely different from someone who hasn't changed. Cora noticed. You're less terrible to be around lately, she said one morning, setting his coffee on his desk without looking up from her tablet. I'm always pleasant, Garrett said. You're reliably tolerable, she said. Recently, you've been occasionally agreeable. Don't make me regret noting it. He didn't tell Cora about Vivienne. He wasn't sure there was a version of telling that matched what was actually happening, which was not yet anything. It was just phone calls and careful information, and the slow accumulation of things he knew about a person. Her daughter liked astronomy and was extremely firm about bedtime, which she enforced on herself because Vivienne worked early shifts and Ada had, at age 4, decided this was something she could do to help. Vivienne's favorite book was The Stone Angel by Margaret Lawrence, which she had read first at 19 and reread every few years, and each time found a different woman inside it. She didn't like to be thanked for things she considered basic decency. She thought most meetings could be emails, which was a position Garrett found himself increasingly unable to argue with. In March, he asked if he could meet Ada properly, not in passing, not at an airport, but intentionally as a thing he wanted to do. Vivienne was quiet for longer than usual. "Why?" she asked. "Because she seems like someone worth knowing. She's 5. "I know. I stand by it." Then, Saturday, the Science Center. "She's been asking to go for 2 months and I haven't had a free Saturday in a while." "I'll drive," he said. "We'll take the subway," she said. "I don't want Ada getting used to things she can't have on a regular basis." He thought about that for a long time after they hung up. Ada met him outside the Ontario Science Center with her coat buttoned to the wrong buttons and a very serious expression that suggested she had things to say and had been preparing them. "My mum told me you're her friend from school," she said. "That's right," Garrett said. "She doesn't talk about school much." "No, I suppose she doesn't." Ada considered him. She was small for 5, with her mother's same direct gaze and an uncanny stillness that most adults he knew couldn't manage. "She said you're helping us," she said. "With the doctor stuff." "A bit, yes." She said, "I'm not supposed to make a big deal of it." "She's probably right." "Okay," Ada said, and turned and walked into the Science Center, apparently satisfied. Vivienne caught his eye over her daughter's head with an expression that was equal parts apology and amusement, and he felt something shift in his chest that he did not immediately have a word for. They spent 3 hours in that building. Ada was relentless. She wanted to see everything, understand everything, and when something confused her, she stood very still and stared at it until it made sense rather than asking for help. She asked Garrett 2 questions the entire time, once about how a gyroscope worked, which he answered correctly to her apparent satisfaction, and once, near the end, standing in front of a display about cardiac anatomy, whether he had a good heart. He wasn't sure she meant it literally. "I'm working on it," he said. She thought about this. "Okay," she said again, and moved on to the next exhibit. In the car park afterward, he had driven even though Vivienne had said subway. She'd accepted the ride without comment, which he took as progress. Ada fell asleep in the back seat before they'd reached the highway. Vivienne sat in the passenger seat looking out at the lake, the gray expanse of Ontario stretching away to the south. "She liked you," Vivienne said. It sounded slightly like it surprised her. "I liked her," he said. Silence. "This is getting complicated," Vivienne said. "I know." She turned to look at him. "I have a lot of things I can't afford right now, Garrett. Complicated is near the top of the list." He kept his eyes on the road. "I know," he said again. "I'm not trying to make your life complicated. I'm here, if that's worth anything." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. They didn't talk for the rest of the drive, but she didn't ask him to drop her early, and when he pulled up in front of her building, a clean but modest apartment block in the Scarborough end of the city, she sat for a moment before getting out, her hand resting on the door handle. "Same time next month?" she said. "The museum is free on Sundays." He managed to keep his voice even. "Yes," he said. "Absolutely." The call came on a Wednesday in April at 7:43 in the morning. He was in his office reviewing a contract when his phone lit up with Vivienne's name, and he knew before he answered it, in the particular way that you know certain things before you know them. "She's been moved up the list," Vivienne said. Her voice was strange, tight, controlled, the way a voice sounds when it is doing more work than usual. "They had a cancellation. They want to do the surgery in 3 weeks." Garrett set the contract down. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. I thought I'd have more time to." A breath. "I'm scared." The word landed between them with a particular weight. He understood, without her having to explain it, what it cost her to say it. "Where are you?" he asked. "Outside work. I called in. I can't go in today." "Stay where you are," he said. "I'm coming." She started to say she didn't need that. He waited and she stopped, and after a moment she said, "Okay, in a voice that was very quiet and very tired and completely honest, and he was already on his way to the elevator. He sat with her in a coffee shop near the airport for 2 hours. He didn't offer solutions, didn't outline logistics, didn't tell her it would be fine. He had learned, somewhere in the past 3 months, that Vivienne did not want those things from him. She wanted someone to be present while she worked through something, and he could do that. He had, in fact, never done it before, and he discovered that doing it required a kind of stillness he hadn't practiced, a willingness to simply be in a room with another person's fear without trying to manage it away. She talked. He listened. At some point, her hand was on the table and he put his hand over it, and she didn't move hers. "I've been alone with this for 5 years," she said. "I know. It shouldn't be this hard to let someone she stopped. "It makes sense that it's hard," he said, "given everything." She looked down at their hands. "You're different than I expected," she said. I don't know. I expected you to be exactly what you used to be like in school." "What was I like?" "Like you'd already decided the shape of everything," she said. "Like the world had a right answer and you'd found it and everyone else was just catching up." She paused. "You still are, a bit, but there's something underneath it now." "Old age," he said. She almost smiled. "You're 38. In Sinclair years, that's substantial." The almost smile became a real one, brief and unguarded, and it was the most valuable thing he'd seen in a long time. "Now let's play a little game. For those who actually read the story and don't just skip to the comments, type Patine below. You'll know why." Ada's surgery was on the second Thursday of May. Vivienne had arranged everything with a precision that Garrett recognized as a form of controlled fear. Every detail locked down, every contingency considered, because if you hold the logistics tightly enough, maybe the other things feel less like falling. He drove them to Sick Kids at 5:30 in the morning. Ada was awake and quiet, holding her mother's hand, wearing a hoodie with a small planet on it that she'd chosen specifically for the occasion because, she explained gravely, space things are calming. He sat with Vivienne for 6 hours in a waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and stale vending machine coffee, while strangers around them lived out their own private versions of the same terrible waiting. She didn't talk much, neither did he. At some point she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes, and he stayed exactly where he was beside her, and that was enough. The surgeon came out at 2 in the afternoon with a face that gave nothing away right up until it gave everything away. The small release of tension around the eyes, the slight drop of the shoulders, and said that Ada was in recovery and that everything had gone well. Vivienne sat very still for about 4 seconds. Then she put her face in her hands and cried in the specific way of someone who has been not crying for a very long time. Garrett put his arm around her. She let him. She didn't stop crying for quite a while, and he didn't say anything, just kept his arm around her shoulders while the waiting room continued its ordinary, extraordinary business around them. When she finally lifted her face, she was embarrassed. He could see it, the reflexive pulling back, the preparation of an apology. "Don't," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You don't have to apologize for that." She pressed her lips together, nodded just once. Ada recovered with the same focused determination she applied to everything. By the second week, she was asking questions about her own surgery in enough anatomical detail to make the nurses laugh. By the 4th week, she was back at school. She sent Garrett a drawing of a heart, anatomically labeled, colored in red and purple, with a note at the bottom in careful 5-year-old printing that said fixed, and he put it on his desk at Sinclair Meridian, where Cora saw it and said nothing, which was how he knew she approved. He and Vivienne talked differently after the surgery. The careful architecture of what they were to each other had shifted somewhere in those 6 hours of waiting, and neither of them tried to rebuild it the way it had been. They had dinner twice in June, just the two of them, Ada with a neighbor for the evening. They talked about things that had nothing to do with hospitals or work or the practical geometry of a difficult life. They talked about what they wanted, vaguely at first, and then with more honesty than Garrett had used in a conversation in years. "I don't know how to be with someone," Vivienne said on the second evening. They were sitting in a restaurant on the Danforth, the kind of place with good wine and close tables, and the particular acoustic of people having actual conversations. "I've been Ada's mother and a worker and a person trying to stay above water, and I'm good at all of those. But this," she gestured between them, "I don't know what I'm doing." Neither do I, Garrett said. She raised an eyebrow. You seem fairly certain most of the time. I'm very good at seeming certain, he said. It's a professional skill. Underneath it, I'm making it up as I go, same as everyone else. She looked at him for a long moment. That's either very reassuring or very alarming. Both, probably. Both, she agreed. He reached across the table and took her hand the same way he had in the coffee shop, and this time she turned her hand over and held his back. They stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. Walking back to her apartment, the summer night warm and easy around them, she told him about her mother, a woman who had emigrated from Nigeria at 26 and spent 30 years working 2 jobs and building something, who had died of a stroke before she could see what Vivienne would become. She talked about her without performance, without the careful containment she used for other painful things. She talked about her the way you talk about someone you miss in your bones. She would have liked you, Vivienne said. She had no patience for men who took up space without doing anything with it. She would have expected you to do something with it. I'm trying, Garrett said. I know, she said, and this time, saying it, she sounded like she believed him. He did not ask her to come and work for him. He thought about it. There was a position that could have been shaped around her skills, and he was honest enough with himself to admit he considered it. Then he remembered what she'd said about Ada, and things she couldn't have on a regular basis, and he understood that the same principle applied to, depending on him, in ways that could dissolve if anything between them changed. So he helped her find a different way. She connected through the foundation with a career services navigator, enrolled in an accelerated business administration program at Humber that started in September, arranged Ada's aftercare through a subsidy program the navigator helped her access. None of it was his. All of it was hers. He was a resource, the way he'd said, a door that could be pushed on, a phone that could be answered. He was there, and she chose to let him be there, and the difference between those two things mattered to her. So it mattered to him. In October, on a Sunday afternoon, while Ada was methodically destroying him at a card game she had invented the rules for, Vivienne came in from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea and sat on the floor next to him because Ada had claimed the couch, and looked at them both with the particular satisfaction of someone who has engineered exactly the situation they wanted. She cheats, Garrett said. I don't cheat, Ada said without looking up from her cards. I use information advantageously. That's cheating. It's strategy. Vivienne pressed her lips together over a smile. She handed Garrett his tea. Their fingers overlapped on the handle for a moment longer than necessary, and Ada looked up from her cards with an expression of great dignity and said, You can hold hands, you know. I'm not a baby. Vivienne laughed out loud, the full, undefended laugh that Garrett had been collecting since February, like someone who has found something they hadn't known they were looking for. He took Vivienne's hand. Ada returned to her cards. Your turn, she said. And I should warn you, I'm about to win. She was right. That evening, after Ada was asleep, she'd put herself to bed at 7:45 with the same precise self-governance she applied to everything. Garrett and Vivienne sat on the small balcony of the apartment while the city did what it does in October, which is to begin its long, honest argument with the cold. The CN Tower was lit up to the south. Somewhere below, a streetcar made the particular sound of a Toronto streetcar, which is like no other sound in the world if you grew up with it. I have something to tell you, Garrett said. Vivienne looked at him. She had learned to read him well enough by now that she knew when something was real, when he was dropping the professional scaffolding and speaking as himself. There's a situation, he said. Something I need you to know before it goes further, because I should have told you earlier and I didn't, and I'm telling you now. She waited. Brendan Lowe, he said. Ada's father. Her face went very still. I know him, Garrett said. Not well, but I know him. He did contract work for a firm we acquired 2 years ago. I didn't know. When I saw you at the airport, I didn't make the connection. But when I started looking into things after we met again, I found it. He paused. He knows who I am. He reached out to me in March, trying to pitch a new project. I didn't respond, but I want you to know that when I do, it won't be with anything he'll find useful. Vivienne was quiet for a long time. Below them, the streetcar made its sound again. You could have not told me, she said finally. Yes, why did you? He looked at her. Because you've spent 5 years with people who decided what you needed to know, he said. I'm not going to be one of those people. She looked away. Her hands were still in her lap and he didn't reach for them. He let her have the moment, all of it, without filling it. Then she reached for his. "Okay," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. The kind of steady that is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of a decision. "Okay." He held her hand in both of his. The city went on below them, unaware of itself, full of ordinary, extraordinary things. They didn't rush anything after that. She had her program, he had his company. Ada had the entire universe to understand, a project she approached with total commitment and a level of seriousness that occasionally stunned her kindergarten teacher. They built a life the way people build things that are meant to last. Not quickly, not without argument, not without the specific kind of frustration that comes from two people who are each fully themselves trying to fit themselves around each other, which is harder and more worthwhile than any other project either of them had ever attempted. On a Saturday in March, a year and 1 month after Garrett had almost walked past a woman on her knees in an airport, almost kept his eyes at the level they'd been trained to stay, he and Vivienne were standing in the kitchen of the house he'd bought in Leslieville, the one they'd spent 6 weekends arguing over, and a 7th deciding on together. And she was reading something on her tablet, and he was making coffee with the particular uselessness of a man who has recently acquired a very complicated espresso machine and refuses to admit it's defeating him. From the living room came the sound of Ada, age 6 now, narrating something elaborate to herself while she drew. "She's going to be a scientist," Vivienne said, without looking up from her tablet. "Or a lawyer," Garrett said. "Or a general, or all three." "Probably all three," he agreed. She set her tablet down and looked at him. The winter light was coming through the kitchen window the way it does in Toronto when it finally decides to try. Pale gold, no promises, just the daily effort of it. He looked back at her, this woman who had looked at him over a mop and a sleeping child, and seen through him to whatever was worth seeing. "Thank you," she said, "for not walking past." "I almost did," he said. "I know," she said, "but you didn't." Ada appeared in the doorway, drawing in hand, looking between them with the expression of someone who has identified an inefficiency. "Are you going to stand there looking at each other?" she said. "Or can we go to the science center, because I have things to see?" Garrett looked at Vivienne. Vivienne looked at Garrett. "Get your coat, Ada," Vivienne said. Ada went for her coat. She put it on with every button in the right hole, which she had mastered sometime in December, and she stood by the front door, waiting with her drawing under her arm and her small face turned toward whatever came next, absolutely certain it would be worth seeing.